Hey everybody, this is Roberto Blake, and today in my series on creating YouTube videos, I'm actually going to talk about how to choose a laptop for your video editing workflow. Now this was actually a video requested by one of my top fans in YouTube, and I promised to do this video a couple of weeks back eventually, so here we are finally. I did plan to include this in my series, so that was part of the delay, and there were a lot of other videos that I actually needed to do before that. So now that we're finally getting to this video, I also have a lot more that I want to talk about with regard to choosing a video editing laptop than I would have if I had done the video sooner. One of the things that I do want to talk about is the fact that it doesn't cost a lot to actually have a really good video editing laptop. A lot of people get misled where that's concerned, and this isn't going to be a Mac versus PC argument so much as it's going to be an effective cost argument. Now, what I want you guys to bear in mind is that despite all the amazing specs we get out of computers today, people were making videos 5 or even 10 years ago, whether they were for online or for feature-length films, and they were editing them sometimes on laptops. But the laptops we have today in some ways even surpass the desktops of 10 years ago. And remember, there were great films and great shows all edited on those machine specs. So I want you to kind of keep that in mind while I'm talking about this. Now, some of you may know from watching previous videos where I've talked about my Photoshop laptop and the specs that I have on that I'm actually using an Asus laptop with dual-core processors for my Photoshop work and my video editing. That laptop cost me less than $400, including the upgrade that I did to it for the RAM. I bought this Asus laptop maybe almost 2 years ago. It hasn't given me a problem since then. I spent $35 to upgrade the RAM from 6 gigs to 8 gigs. It's dual core, it's running I think 2.2 gigahertz in terms of processor speed, and it works out really well. It's got only a 5400 RPM hard drive. That's probably what the real bottleneck of the laptop is, but I have really no delays in working with it for my work in Photoshop or in Adobe Premiere Pro, and I'm even able to do After Effects work in it. And I'm going to explain a little bit of why that is. So when you're picking a video editing machine in general, whether it's a laptop or desktop, here are the things that you have to consider. You have to consider processor speed, you have to consider RAM, you have to consider the speed of the hard drives, how many hard drives you have in terms of IO/read-write, and you have to consider media caching, which I'll get into more detail later, but basically it's your temporary file storage for doing edits in real time, etc. So that's part of it, and you also now have to really consider your video card, because if you're doing Adobe Premiere editing, Adobe Premiere finally really takes advantage, if you're using CS6 or CC, of the video GPU processing power via the Mercury playback engine. So I want to get into that just a little bit. So given the considerations of what you have to think of when you're approaching a video editing machine, whether it's a laptop or desktop, let's focus back in on laptops for this conversation. One of the primary differences between desktops and laptops is the limited expansion capabilities of the laptop. With desktops, you can slap in usually as much RAM as you want into the motherboard within reason. You can go up to 32, 64 gigs. You can slap in multiple hard drive bays. You could put 8 hard drives in that monster if you feel you need to for whatever reason, which opens up a lot of different capabilities. And you can get more powerful processors. So that's one of the primary differences. Now, if you're willing to spend enough money, you can actually get almost all of those things in the right laptop. There's actually a link to another YouTube video where another YouTuber actually talks about the perfect quote-unquote laptop for video editing. And what is great about that laptop is if you really want to, you can actually have 3 hard drives, 3 complete hard drives in that laptop. You can have 16 gigs of RAM, and it has a 3 gig dedicated video card. So if you're interested in something like that, go ahead and look at the link in the description below and check out that video. But in general, that's something that's going to cost you between $1,200 and $1,500. But it is a Toshiba laptop, so it is a Windows-based laptop, it is a PC. I don't know that it's possible to get 3 hard drives in a Mac laptop. The most I've imagined getting into a MacBook Pro is 2 hard drives by removing the optical bay and putting in an SSD drive. So that's one of the limitations of using a Mac laptop for your video editing workflow. The other is that you can't upgrade the graphics card, whereas you can do that on some PC laptops. You can upgrade the RAM, but you can only max it out at 8 gigs. Whereas on PC laptops, you can go as much as 16 or more sometimes. So those are some advantages for the price you pay. A base model MacBook Pro with Retina is going to cost you $1,700+ and you're not getting a secondary hard drive, you're not getting those other things. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that if you do choose a Mac editing workflow, there is going to be a bottleneck in terms of the price for the performance and the specs. Because with video editing, here's why multiple hard drives is a good thing. Multiple hard drives allow you to deal with what's called read-write. And if you followed some of my Photoshop advice or my advice on buying a Photoshop laptop, then you know that my ideal hard drive setup with any Photoshop machine is to have at least 3 hard drives, but 4 if you can get it, because I prefer to have an application layer, an OS layer, a data layer, and then a media caching layer or scratch disk layer. So that's 4 hard drives, theoretically. Now with a laptop, even if you can only get 3 physical hard drives in there, you have the option of using an external USB hard drive for that 4th level. So, you know, that's the other part of it. And in a video editing workflow, what you could do with that is you could combine the application and OS layer to a single hard drive and actually still use it for some data storage, because let's face it, we're talking about a 500 to 750 gigabyte hard drive. You're going to want to use that space on that first drive. So the way I would do it is you use the first hard drive for your application and your operating system. And you make sure that that hard drive is an SSD hard drive or a hybrid hard drive. The next hard drive that you have as far as physical media in there will be your primary data hard drive. That's where you're going to store all your files and your media. And then the hard drive that you're going to use to replace your optical bay with, you use that as your scratch disk or your media caching hard drive. And that's where you're going to point your Photoshop and your After Effects and your Premiere scratch disk to in order to create and generate preview files and to help with some of your real-time editing and rendering. To reduce read-write, when you're actually exporting your files, you're going to send it back to that second hard drive. So when the application's working, it and the operating system are going to be working off of one hard drive, so all the internal bandwidth is going to be utilized there. When you're actually pulling your source files, it's going to be using the data hard drive, and theoretically, if you have an external hard drive, you can export your final hard drive's files there so that there's no bottleneck there. And then for when you're doing your actual working and editing, you're using the third hard drive as your scratch disk / media caching hard drive, and everything that you're doing with filters, with adjustment layers, all that stuff is going there. So that's how it would work out. If you're having a hard time grasping I/O and read-write, think of it like this. Think about it as lanes on a highway, and think about all your data for different things as individual cars. So you've got a dedicated lane for your operating system and your application stuff. You've got a dedicated lane for all the data that has to do with your actual files, your actual video files that you're using. You have a dedicated lane that your video editing application is using for all the things that's doing in real time. And then you have a dedicated lane for when you're finally exporting and rendering all of that, for it all to just go to one place without any bottleneck. So that's why you have the separate multiple hard drives. That's why it's more expensive to do that in your laptop. It's, you know, more cost effective to do it with a desktop. But if you're going to do video editing on a laptop, it's really the best overall solution. Now, if you're going to use a cheaper laptop like mine, you can go ahead and you can get 2 hard drives out of it by taking out the optical drive and putting an SSD in that. I haven't done that on my laptop as of yet because I actually still do need the DVD drive for some things, and I haven't bothered to buy an external DVD drive for it. When I do buy the external USB DVD drive, I will be swapping out the optical bay and putting in an SSD hybrid drive in there. So that's how I'm going to ultimately be doing that. The other thing is RAM. My computer, in terms of my Asus laptop, can take 8 gigs of RAM, and that's why I can get supreme performance out of After Effects, Premiere, and Photoshop when I'm doing my editing workflow. And it makes all the difference in the world. RAM is just one of those things that you want to get as much of it as you can, because when it's trying to do all of these things, it's pulling those resources in addition to the GPU and video card. For your laptop, if you can get a laptop with a dedicated video card, you're going to want to do that. And again, these are affordable. Right now, I actually found that there's an HP laptop with a 1.5 gig dedicated video card, upgradable to 8 gigs of RAM, and it actually even has a 7200 RPM hard drive in it, and it's only $329. So you can upgrade this to have equal performance to a MacBook Pro, all for under $500, including putting the other secondary SSD hard drive in there. So when you think about it comparatively, that's a huge savings. And again, I'm not dissing the MacBook Pro. It's a fantastic overall laptop. But for video editing, there's a lot that you want to upgrade and do because you just need that performance. And there's a price bottleneck with the Mac laptops. So, that's what it really comes down to there. Now, there are a lot of people who do video editing on the MacBook Pros, but they've already paid additional money to max it out at only the 8 gigs versus the 16, and to have the 2 hard drives versus the 3. So I just want you to keep that in mind in terms of specs, hardware, feature, and price. Now, for the macOS experience, or to use Final Cut Pro, it may be worth it for you. So if that's your workflow, definitely do that. But in your MacBook Pro, go ahead and swap out the hard drive that it comes with, do your cloning, and just go ahead and put a hybrid hard drive in there so that you have the maximum capacity with the performance of an SSD, and go ahead and put either a second hybrid hard drive in the optical bay or a pure SSD drive. That's going to be my best recommendation. And then use an external hard drive just to have another third hard drive there so that you can go ahead and export your files to that when you're done. And that's going to be the best workflow for you. If you can get something like a Drobo, by the way, or a Drobo Mini, that's really good for backing up your files. That's just an extra thing that I'm going to throw out there. In terms of a display, if you can get an LED or a very good LCD display as an alternative to Retina, if you're not using a MacBook Pro with Retina, then I highly recommend that, because when you have to stare at the screen for hours video editing, that's going to be easier on your eyes. So you really want to make sure that whatever your display setup is, that that's really good. I'm also going to recommend getting a Toshiba portable external monitor with its own built-in kickstand. Those are about $180. I highly recommend that. If you're used to a dual screen workflow and want one that's mobile, that's what I would do if I was you. The other thing that I'm going to cover with regard to video cards is that for gaming, people recommend ATI. But for video rendering, you're going to want NVIDIA if you can get it. And I highly recommend getting something in the 630 family or better, 650 if you can get it, etc. Integrated onboard video is okay, but it's really not going to help you take advantage of the Mercury playback engine in Adobe Premiere, which is what I use for my editing, and it's really not going to help you much on the rendering side. But if you have a dedicated video card, that's going to help you tremendously, and it's going to speed up your workflow, reduce your render times, and it's just going to be a better overall experience for you. So that's pretty much my advice when picking out a laptop for video editing. The brands that I'm going to recommend are, of course, Asus. I'm going to recommend the Sony Vaio laptops. I'm going to recommend Acer. I'm going to highly recommend Toshiba. And I'm also going to recommend, obviously, the MacBook Pros. I'm not going to recommend video editing on a MacBook Air because of a lot of the limitations in terms of its overall capacity for everything, in terms of RAM, hard drive, etc., and cost to upgrade those things. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you with making some decisions with regard to how you're going to go about picking out a laptop for video editing. Like this video if you like it, subscribe. Let me know if you have recommendations on a better approach to picking a laptop, or laptop recommendations in general. for video editing. I'm going to have links to a lot of the laptops that I mentioned in the description below, so check that out. And stay tuned for the rest of my videos in this series. All right, thanks for watching.